He never talked about his past, never mentioned why he drove so smoothly around every turn, never explained his perfect timing at red lights. But when the radio crackled with news of a plane in distress, the old taxi driver pulled over, closed his eyes, and whispered a prayer only someone who'd been there would know. Welcome to Interesting Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden heroes and forgotten legends, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe real heroes should never be forgotten, hit that subscribe button and help keep these stories alive. The night shift always started the same way. LAX Terminal, Gate 4, taxi queue number 47. Frank Martinez sat behind the wheel of his yellow Crown Victoria, the same spot he'd claimed for the past 6 years. 67 years old, silver hair beneath a worn baseball cap, hands that never quite stopped being steady despite the years. The younger drivers called him old school behind his back, sometimes grandpa when they thought he couldn't hear. Look at him, Jake whispered to his buddy Marcus, pointing at Frank through the windshield. Dude's been sitting there for 20 minutes, hasn't even checked his phone once, probably doesn't even know how to use one. Marcus laughed, adjusting his Bluetooth headset. At his speed, passengers probably fall asleep before they reach downtown. I make 3 runs while he's finishing one. But Frank didn't care about their jokes. He'd learned patience in places these kids couldn't imagine. Every turn he took was smooth, deliberate, like he was still following approach vectors. Every red light stop was timed perfectly, as if he'd calculated the traffic flow from 30,000 feet. His passengers sometimes complained about his careful driving. "Can't you go any faster?" A businessman had snapped that very evening, checking his Rolex impatiently. Frank had glanced in the rearview mirror with calm eyes. "Sir, anyone in a real hurry should take a plane. Trust me, I know about speed." That Thursday night felt different from the start. The marine layer was rolling in from the Pacific, creating that thick fog that made even experienced drivers nervous. Frank had seen it before, though not from ground level. He remembered similar conditions over San Francisco Bay in '98, trying to land a 767 with zero visibility and a hydraulic leak. It was 11:47 p.m. when Sarah Chen climbed into his back seat, aviation management student at USC, heading home from a late study session. She noticed immediately that his radio wasn't tuned to the usual taxi dispatch frequency. "Excuse me," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "What station is that?" Frank adjusted his rearview mirror to meet her eyes. "Air traffic control," he said simply. "Old habit." Sarah frowned. "You can pick up ATC frequencies in a taxi?" "Modified scanner," Frank replied, pulling away from the curb with the kind of smooth acceleration that didn't jar passengers. "I like to know what's happening up there." That's when the emergency transmission crackled through. "Mayday, Mayday, United 447 Heavy, declaring emergency, left engine failure. Souls on board 3112, requesting vectors for emergency approach to LAX. Frank's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. Sarah noticed his entire posture change, subtle but unmistakable. In the side mirror, she could see his jaw clench. "Tower, United 447, we have complete left engine failure. Fuel remaining approximately 45 minutes, requesting priority landing runway 25 right. Frank pulled into a parking lot without explanation, turned up the radio volume. Sarah watched as he closed his eyes and moved his lips silently. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression, something she couldn't quite identify. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "you seem to know a lot about aviation." Frank looked at her in the mirror. For a moment, he seemed to weigh something in his mind. 32 years, he said finally. "United Airlines. Captain Frank Martinez, employee ID 47291, retired December 15th. Sarah's breath caught. "You were an airline pilot. Boeing 737s, 757s, 767s, and 777s, Frank said, still listening to the radio. "Domestic routes mostly, some international. LAX to Denver was my regular run for 15 years. That frequency they're on, I've used it 1,000 times. The radio continued. 447 Heavy, winds 250 at 12, visibility 1/4 mile in fog. Are you declaring fuel emergency? Negative on fuel emergency, but we need to get this bird on the ground. Single engine approach, we're going to need the full runway." Frank got out of the taxi, adjusted the antenna for better reception. Within minutes, other drivers had gathered around, drawn by the drama unfolding in the sky above them. Jake and Marcus exchanged glances, suddenly seeing their old-school colleague in a different light. "This is bad," Frank told the growing crowd, his voice carrying the authority of experience. "Single-engine landing in these conditions. Full passenger load. I've been there. You've done this before?" Jake asked, his earlier mockery forgotten. "Frankfurt to JFK, 2003, Frank said, his eyes distant. "February 14th, Valentine's Day. Left engine threw a turbine blade over the Atlantic. 284 passengers, including a full wedding party heading to New York. We had to dump fuel for 30 minutes before attempting approach." Sarah was recording on her phone now, not for social media, but because she sensed she was witnessing something important. "What happened?" Marcus asked quietly. Frank's hands unconsciously gripped an invisible yoke. "Single-engine approaches are about precision, not panic. You get one chance. The aircraft wants to yaw left without that left engine thrust, so you're fighting the rudder pedals the entire time. Your landing speed is higher, your stopping distance is longer, and if you miss the approach, you might not have fuel for a second attempt." The radio crackled again. 447, "We have you on approach. Fire equipment is standing by. Medical crews are in position. Weather is improving. Visibility now half a mile." Frank nodded approvingly. "Good. Visibility is everything in a situation like this." A young woman from the airport crowd had approached. "Are you really a pilot?" Frank reached into his wallet, pulled out a worn ID card. "Captain Frank Martinez, retired," he said simply. 31 years of service, 0 accidents, 0 incidents. "Why are you driving taxi?" Jake asked, genuinely curious now. Frank smiled for the first time that evening. "Because I still love moving people safely from one place to another. Doesn't matter if it's at 35,000 feet or street level." 447, "You are cleared to land runway 25 right. Winds now 2040 at 8. Visibility 3/4 mile and improving." The gathered crowd fell silent as they listened to the final approach. Frank's breathing was steady, controlled like he was mentally flying the approach himself. "Come on," he whispered. "Easy does it. Trust your training." Minutes passed. Then, tower, United 447 Heavy is on the ground. Aircraft stopped on runway, all souls safe, requesting ground crews. A cheer went up from the crowd. Frank exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. Sarah watched as several people clapped him on the back, asking questions, wanting to know more about his flying days. "Captain Martinez," Sarah said as the crowd began to disperse, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you miss it, flying?" Frank looked up at the fog-shrouded sky, where somewhere above a fellow pilot had just brought 312 people home safely. "Every single day," he said. "But missing something and needing to do it are different things. I've had my time in the sky. Now I help people navigate the ground." As they drove toward Sarah's destination, she noticed Frank's driving was different somehow. More purposeful, more professional. Like she was being transported by someone who truly understood the responsibility of carrying human lives. "Captain," she said as they pulled up to her apartment, "thank you for the ride, and for the story." Frank touched the brim of his cap. "Anytime, miss. Fly safe out there." After that night, word spread quickly through the taxi ranks at LAX. The old guy they'd been calling Grandpa was Captain Frank Martinez, a man who'd spent 3 decades safely transporting millions of passengers through the skies. Jake started calling him Cap, with genuine respect. Marcus began asking him about weather patterns and flight delays. Frank never bragged about his flying days, never told war stories from the cockpit. But sometimes, when young drivers asked about patience, about safety, about what it really meant to be responsible for people's lives, he'd share a memory or two. Always quietly, always with the humility of someone who'd learned that real heroes don't need to announce themselves. Real pilots never truly retire. They just find new ways to keep people safe, one journey at a time. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Captain Martinez? Someone who appeared ordinary but carried extraordinary experience. Someone whose quiet competence spoke louder than any boast. Share their names in the comments. Tell their stories, because here at The Human Stories, we honor those who carry greatness without fanfare. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Help us keep alive the stories of hidden heroes who continue serving long after the spotlight fades. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember that the person sitting quietly beside you might have stories that would take your breath away.